I thought the laminated list of rules taped to the refrigerator was just the owner's quirky sense of humor. 7 oddly specific instructions written in faded red ink, each one stranger than the last. I even laughed when I first read them, snapping a picture to send to my friends back in Bellingham. But that was before the knocking started, before I saw the footprints, before I realized that some rules are not meant to be broken, and some places are not meant to be understood. My name is Max. I am 29 years old, and what happened in that cabin during 5 days in October has changed the way I see the world forever. I had been looking for an escape. My job as a software developer had been draining me for months, the endless video calls and artificial deadlines slowly grinding me down to nothing. My apartment in Bellingham felt like a cage, the city noise a constant buzz that never let my mind rest. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of traffic on the street below, the neighbor's dog barking through the thin walls, the constant hum of the city that never truly sleeps. I would sit at my desk, staring at lines of code that blurred together, my mind foggy and exhausted. My boss kept piling on projects, each one more urgent than the last, and I could feel myself breaking down piece by piece. I needed silence. I needed isolation. I needed somewhere far from people, from technology, from everything that had been slowly suffocating me. That is how I found the listing for the cabin in the Cascade Mountains, buried deep on a rental website that looked like it had not been updated since 2005. The page was simple, almost primitive in its design. There were only 4 photos, all slightly blurry and poorly lit. But even through the low-quality images, I could see what I was looking for. A small wooden structure surrounded by towering pines, a stone fireplace visible through one window, and a porch with a single rocking chair overlooking the valley below. The description was brief, almost cryptic. Complete solitude. No neighbors for miles. No cell service. No distractions. Perfect for those seeking true isolation. The price was almost too good to be true, less than half of what other cabins in the area were charging. There were no reviews, no ratings, just that simple description and those 4 grainy photos. Now, before I tell you what happened up there, I want to ask you something. Have you ever ignored a warning because you thought you knew better? Have you ever broken a rule just to see what would happen? If you have, then you understand the mistake I made. And if you are watching this, if you have made it this far into my story, I need you to do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because what I am about to share with you is not just entertainment. It is a warning, and I need as many people as possible to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong? Somewhere that made your instincts scream at you to leave? Because I wish I had listened to mine. I really wish I had listened. I booked the cabin for a week without hesitation. The owner, someone named J. Pierce, responded to my inquiry within an hour. The email was brief and businesslike. Cabin is available for your requested dates. Payment due in full upfront. Key will be under the mat. Checkout is at 10 a.m. on your final day. Please read the house rules carefully upon arrival. There was a link to a payment portal, and I transferred the money immediately. I needed this trip. I needed to get away before I completely fell apart. The drive from Bellingham took almost 4 hours. I left early on a Monday morning in mid-October, my car packed with groceries, books, and a duffel bag full of clothes. I had told my boss I was taking a week of personal leave, and I had informed my friends that I would be unreachable. No phone, no internet, no contact with the outside world. Just me and the wilderness. The thought filled me with a sense of relief I had not felt in months. The route took me deeper into the mountains than I had ever been, winding along narrow roads that cut through dense forest. The autumn colors were stunning at first, the trees ablaze with orange and gold, the morning sun casting long shadows across the road. I drove with the windows down, breathing in the crisp mountain air, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. But as I climbed higher, as the road grew narrower and more isolated, the scenery began to change. The vibrant colors faded, replaced by darker greens and the skeletal branches of trees that had already lost their leaves. The sky grew overcast, a thick blanket of gray clouds pressing down on the landscape, blocking out the sun. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I had to roll up my windows and turn on the heat. Asterisk, by the time I reached the turnoff for the cabin, a light drizzle had begun to fall. The raindrops pattered against the windshield, and the wipers squeaked as they swept back and forth. The dirt road leading to the property was barely visible, marked only by a weathered wooden sign that read, Pinecrest Cabin, Private Property. The sign was old, the paint peeling and faded, and it leaned at an angle as if it might fall over at any moment. I almost missed it, having to brake hard and reverse to make the turn. The dirt road was rough and rutted, full of potholes and loose gravel. My car bounced and rattled over the uneven terrain, branches scraping against the sides as I navigated the narrow path. The forest closed in around me, the trees so thick that they blocked out most of the remaining daylight. It felt like driving through a tunnel, the branches overhead forming a canopy that turned the afternoon into twilight. I could barely see, more than a few feet ahead, and I had to drive slowly, carefully avoiding the deeper ruts that threatened to bottom out my car. After 15 minutes of driving, I began to wonder if I had made a wrong turn. The road seemed to go on forever, winding deeper and deeper into the forest with no sign of any structure. I checked the directions Pierce had sent me, but they were vague. Follow the dirt road for approximately 2 miles. Cabin will be on your left. I had gone at least that far, maybe more, but there was nothing but trees on either side of the road. I was about to give up and turn around when the trees suddenly opened up, and I saw it. The cabin sat in a small clearing, exactly as it had appeared in the photos, though somehow smaller and more isolated than I had imagined. It was a single-story structure built from dark wood that looked weathered and old, the planks warped in places and covered with patches of moss. The roof was made of wooden shingles, many of them missing or broken, and a thin line of smoke rose from the chimney. Wait, smoke? That did not make sense. No one should be here. I parked near the porch and stared at the chimney, but the smoke had already dissipated. Maybe I had imagined it. The porch wrapped around the front of the cabin, the wooden boards sagging and creaking even from where I sat in the car. There, just as the photos had shown, was the rocking chair. It was old and weathered, the wood dark, with age, and it faced the forest with a stillness that felt deliberate. The windows of the cabin were dark, reflecting nothing but the gray sky above. Behind the cabin, the forest stretched endlessly, a wall of trees that seemed to go on forever, disappearing into mist and shadow. There was something unsettling about the place, something I could not quite put my finger on. It was too quiet. No birds singing, no wind rustling through the trees, no sounds of animals moving through the underbrush. Just an oppressive, heavy silence that pressed down on everything. Even the rain had stopped, leaving only the soft drip of water falling from the trees. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the cabin, feeling a knot of unease forming in my stomach. A part of me wanted to turn around and drive back to Bellingham, but I had paid for the week, and I needed this break. I needed to disconnect. I shook off the feeling and told myself I was just tired from the drive that I grabbed my bags from the back seat and walked up the creaking wooden steps to the front door. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The porch boards felt soft in places, almost spongy, and I made a mental note to watch my step. The key was supposed to be under the mat, and sure enough, there it was, a tarnished brass key that looked like it belonged in a museum. It was heavy in my hand, the metal cold to the touch. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The interior was simple but functional, though everything had an air of neglect and age. A small living room with the promised stone fireplace dominated the space, the stones dark and stained with soot. A couch that had seen better days sat facing the fireplace, its cushions sagging and the fabric worn thin in places. A coffee table made from a thick slab of wood sat in front of the couch, covered in a thin layer of dust that showed no recent disturbance. To the left was a kitchenette with a refrigerator that hummed loudly, a stove that looked like it dated back to the 1970s, and a sink with a dripping faucet. To the right, a short hallway led to what I assumed were the bedroom and bathroom. Everything smelled faintly of pine and something else, something musty and old, like a basement that had been closed up for years. There was also a hint of smoke in the air, which explained the chimney. Someone must have been here recently, perhaps to prepare the cabin for my arrival. I set my bags down and walked through the cabin, checking each room. The bedroom was small, with a single bed covered in a faded quilt, a wooden dresser with drawers that stuck when I tried to open them, and a small window that looked out at the forest. The bathroom had a shower with rust stains in the tub, a toilet that ran constantly, and a mirror that was cracked in one corner, the fracture spreading like a spider web across the glass. Everything seemed normal, if a little dated and worn. I returned to the living room and began unpacking my groceries, putting them away in the refrigerator and the small cupboard above the sink. As I closed the refrigerator door, I saw it. The list.it was taped to the refrigerator door with yellowed Scotch tape, a piece of laminated paper that looked old and handled. The lamination was peeling at the edges, and the paper inside was slightly yellowed with age. At the top, in larger letters written in faded red ink, it said, "Rules for staying at Pinecrest Cabin. Please follow carefully." Below that were 7 numbered rules, each one written in that same neat, deliberate handwriting. Never open the windows after sunset. No matter how hot it gets inside, if you hear knocking at the door after 10 p.m., do not look through the peephole or answer. Keep all lights off in the basement. Do not go down there for any reason after dark. If you see footprints in the morning that lead to the cabin, but none that lead away, stay inside until noon. Do not take any photographs of the forest behind the cabin between dusk and dawn. If the radio turns on by itself, let it play until it stops on its own. Do not change the station or turn it off. If you find the rocking chair on the porch moving on its own, go back inside immediately and do not return outside until morning. I read through the list twice, a smile forming on my face despite the unsettling atmosphere of the cabin. They had to be a joke, some kind of gimmick to add atmosphere to the rental, to make guests feel like they were in a horror movie. It was clever marketing, really. I even chuckled as I read the last one about the rocking chair. It was exactly the kind of thing you would see in a cheap horror film. The overly dramatic warnings that the protagonist always ignores right before something terrible happens. I took a picture of the list with my phone, intending to text it to my friend Derek with some sarcastic comment about how I had rented a haunted cabin. But when I looked at my phone, there was no signal, not even a single bar. I walked around the cabin, holding my phone up, trying different spots, but it was the same everywhere. No service at all. I tried to remember if the listing had mentioned anything about cell service, and then I recalled the description. No cell service. Right. That was part of the appeal. Complete disconnection from the digital world. I shrugged and pocketed my phone. It did not matter. I had brought books to read and a journal to write in. I did not need my phone. In fact, not having it might be good for me. I spent the rest of that first day settling in, unpacking my bags, arranging my books on the coffee table, and familiarizing myself with the cabin. I explored every room more thoroughly, opening drawers and cupboards, finding nothing but dust and the occasional dead spider die in the hallway. I found a door that I had initially assumed was a closet. When I opened it, I discovered a set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. The basement. I flicked the light switch next to the door, and a single bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered to life, casting weak, yellow light into the space below. I could see wooden stairs, old and worn, and beyond them a dirt floor. The smell that wafted up was earthy and damp, with an underlying scent of decay. I peered down, but could not see much from the top of the stairs. Something about the basement made me uncomfortable, and I remembered rule number 3. Keep all lights off in the basement. Do not go down there for any reason after dark. I turned off the light and closed the door. I had no intention of going down there, day or night, by late afternoon. I had settled in enough to start relaxing. I built a fire in the stone fireplace, using the logs that were stacked neatly beside it. The wood was dry and caught easily, and soon a warm fire was crackling in the hearth. I made myself dinner, a simple pasta dish with marinara sauce from a jar, and ate while watching the flames dance and flicker. The cabin grew warm and cozy, and the silence that had unnerved me earlier now felt almost peaceful. Maybe I had been overthinking things. Maybe this cabin was exactly what I needed. As evening approached and darkness began to fall, I noticed the temperature inside the cabin rising. The fire had warmed the small space effectively, maybe too effectively. I was starting to feel uncomfortably hot, and sweat was forming on my forehead. I glanced at the windows. They were all closed, latched tight. It would be nice to open one, just for a few minutes, to let in some fresh air. I stood up and walked over to the nearest window, placing my hand on the latch, and then I remembered the first rule. Never open the windows after sunset, no matter how hot it gets inside. I looked outside. The sun had set, and darkness had fallen over the clearing. The forest was nothing but shadows now, the trees barely visible against the night sky. I could not see anything moving out there, could not hear anything. Just darkness and silence. My hand hovered over the latch, and I felt a strong urge to open it, to let in the cool night air. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the rule was worded, with such certainty and seriousness. Maybe it was the oppressive silence outside. Or maybe it was just instinct, some primal part of my brain warning me not to break the boundary between inside and outside, that I stepped away from the window and let the latch remain closed. Instead, I opened the front door briefly, just a crack, to let in some air. The cool breeze felt good, and I stood there for a moment, breathing in the night air. But something about the darkness outside made me uncomfortable, and I quickly closed and locked the door. I would just have to deal with the heat. That night, I read by the firelight until my eyes grew heavy, working through the first few chapters of a thriller novel I had brought along. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the cabin had cooled to a more comfortable temperature. I checked the time on my watch. It was 9:47 p.m. I was exhausted from the drive and the day of settling in, and I decided to call it a night. I brushed my teeth in the tiny bathroom, changed into my pajamas, and climbed into bed. The mattress was lumpy and the springs creaked with every movement, but I was tired enough that it did not matter much. I turned off the lamp on the bedside table and closed my eyes. The darkness was absolute, deeper and more complete than any darkness I had ever experienced in the city. No streetlights filtering through curtains, no glow from neighboring buildings, no light pollution at all. Just pure, complete blackness. It was disorienting at first, almost suffocating, but I told myself to relax. This was what I had wanted. Total isolation, total darkness, total silence. I lay there, listening to the quiet, and slowly began to drift off to sleep. My mind wandered, thoughts becoming fragmented and dreamlike. I thought about work, about the projects I had left behind, about my apartment in Bellingham. And then, just as I was on the edge of sleep, I heard something. A soft creaking sound, rhythmic and steady, coming from outside. My eyes snapped open, though I could see nothing in the darkness. I lay perfectly still, listening. The sound continued. Creak, creak, creak. A slow, deliberate back and forth motion. It took me a moment to place it, my sleep-fogged brain struggling to identify the source. And then I realized what it was: the rocking chair. Someone, or something, was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch. My heart began to race, adrenaline flooding my system and banishing any trace of sleepiness. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more clearly. The creaking continued, steady and rhythmic, the sound of wood moving against wood. It was definitely coming from the porch, from the direction of the front door. I threw off the covers and swung my legs out of bed, my feet touching the cold wooden floor. I stood up and moved quietly toward the bedroom window, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The cabin was dark, and I had to feel my way along the wall to avoid bumping into furniture. My hands found the window frame, and I carefully pulled back the edge of the curtain, just enough to peek outside. The porch was illuminated by faint moonlight that had broken through the clouds. I could see the rocking chair clearly now, its dark silhouette stark against the gray wood of the porch. And it was moving, back and forth, in that same steady rhythm. The motion was smooth and deliberate, as if someone were sitting in it, gently pushing with their feet, but there was no one in the chair. It was empty. The chair was rocking on its own. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warmth of the cabin. I stared at the chair, watching it move, trying to find a rational explanation. The wind, maybe? But even as I thought it, I knew it was not the wind. The night was completely still. The trees were not moving. There was no breeze at all. And yet the chair continued its slow, steady rocking. Rule number 7 came back to me with sudden clarity. If you find the rocking chair on the porch moving on its own, go back inside immediately and do not return outside until morning. But I was already inside. I was safe behind locked doors and closed windows. Whatever was out there could not get in. Could it? I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away from the window. My hands were shaking, and I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly feeling very cold. The creaking continued, the sound seeming to fill the cabin despite the walls between me and the porch. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, trying to calm my racing heart. It was just the wind, I told myself again, even though I knew it was a lie. Just some natural phenomenon I did not understand. Old wood settling. Temperature changes causing the chair to shift. There had to be a logical explanation, but deep down, I knew there was not. The creaking continued for another 10 minutes, maybe 15. I lay in bed, listening to every sound, my body tense and alert. And then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse, heavy and oppressive, like something was waiting just outside. I strained my ears, listening for any sound, any indication of what had been out there. But there was nothing. Just that terrible, empty silence. I lay awake for hours, unable to sleep, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. Every small sound made me jump. The settling of the cabin, the drip of the faucet in the bathroom, the occasional pop from the dying embers in the fireplace. I kept expecting to hear the creaking start again, or the sound of footsteps on the porch, or something scratching at the windows. But nothing happened. The night remained quiet. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear. My eyelids grew heavy, and despite my racing thoughts, I felt myself drifting off. The last thing I remember before falling asleep was checking my watch. It was 3:34 a.m. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the bedroom window, bright and warm. I lay in bed for a moment, disoriented, my mind struggling to remember where I was. And then it all came back. The cabin, the rules, the rocking chair. I sat up quickly and looked at my watch. It was 8:17 a.m. I had slept later than I had intended, my body making up for the hours of wakefulness in the middle of the night. That I got dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a flannel shirt, and walked out to the living room. Everything looked normal in the morning light. The fire had gone completely out, leaving only cold ashes in the fireplace. The cabin was chilly, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air. I walked to the front door and hesitated for just a moment before unlocking it and pulling it open. The porch was empty. The rocking chair sat perfectly still, facing the forest, exactly as it had when I arrived. The morning was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant blue with no trace of the clouds from the previous day. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Fresh and clean. Everything seemed peaceful, normal, safe. I stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking under my feet, and looked around the clearing, and then I saw them. Footprints. They were in the dirt at the edge of the porch, clearly visible in the soft earth. I walked down the steps slowly, my eyes fixed on the prints, my heart beginning to race again. They were human footprints, adult-sized, made by bare feet. The impressions were deep and clear, showing the outline of toes and the arch of the foot. They led from the forest straight toward the cabin, crossing the clearing in a direct line and ending at the base of the porch steps. That I followed the trail with my eyes, tracing it back toward the tree line. But that was where it ended. There were footprints leading to the cabin, but none leading away. It was as if whoever had made them had simply appeared at the edge of the forest, walked directly to my porch, and then vanished. I walked down the steps and crouched beside the prints, examining them more closely. They were definitely fresh, made sometime during the night, probably during the rain that had fallen before I went to bed. The edges were sharp and well-defined, not yet eroded by wind or weather. I reached out and touched one, feeling the damp earth, and a chill ran through me. Rule number 4 came back to me with terrible clarity. If you see footprints in the morning that lead to the cabin but none that lead away, stay inside until noon. I stood up quickly and looked around the clearing, suddenly feeling very exposed and vulnerable. The forest seemed darker than it had moments before, the shadows between the trees deeper and more impenetrable. Anything could be watching me from those shadows, and I would never know. I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me, and every instinct screamed at me to get back inside. That I turned and hurried up the porch steps, nearly tripping in my haste. I rushed inside and slammed the door behind me, locking it with shaking hands. My breath came in short gasps, and I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself. I checked my watch. It was 8:23 a.m. According to the rule, I had to stay inside until noon. 3 hours and 37 minutes that I tried to distract myself, to find something to occupy my mind so I would not think about those impossible footprints. I made breakfast in the tiny kitchenette, scrambling eggs and making toast on the old stove. But I barely tasted any of it, my mind too preoccupied with what I had seen. I tried reading my book, but the words blurred together on the page, meaningless and incomprehensible. I found myself reading the same paragraph over and over. Unable to focus, I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see a face peering in at me. Every small sound made me jump. the hum of the refrigerator, the drip of the faucet, the creak of the cabin settling. I found myself pacing the small space, unable to sit still, my anxiety building with each passing minute. What had made those footprints? Who had been standing on my porch in the middle of the night, while I lay in bed listening to that rocking chair? The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. I checked my watch obsessively, watching the hands tick forward with painful deliberation. 8:45, 9:12, 9:38. Each minute felt like an hour, and I began to feel like a prisoner in the cabin, trapped by rules I did not understand and phenomena I could not explain at 10:15. Unable to bear the confinement any longer, I decided to explore the cabin more thoroughly. Maybe I had missed something, some clue that would explain what was happening. I started in the bedroom, opening drawers and looking under the bed. Nothing but dust and the occasional dead insect. The dresser was empty except for a few wire hangers. The closet contained only cobwebs that I moved to the bathroom and searched there as well, finding nothing of interest. Old rust stains, peeling paint, a medicine cabinet with nothing inside. I returned to the living room and looked around more carefully. The coffee table had a single drawer, which I opened to find some old magazines from the 1990s, their pages yellowed and brittle. The couch cushions revealed nothing but loose change and more dust. And then I noticed something I had missed before. In the corner of the room, partially hidden behind the couch, was an old radio. It was a transistor radio, the kind that ran on batteries, with a telescoping antenna and a dial for tuning stations. I picked it up and examined it. The casing was dusty and the battery compartment was corroded, but when I slid the power switch, I heard a faint crackle of static. I quickly turned it off, remembering rule number 6. If the radio turns on by itself, let it play until it stops on its own. I set the radio back down carefully, exactly where I had found it, and backed away. My watch showed 11:03. Less than an hour to go. I could make it. I just had to stay calm and wait. At 11:45, I was standing by the door, watching the hands on my watch tick closer to noon. My hand was on the doorknob, ready to unlock at the moment the minute hand reached 12. When it finally did, when my watch showed exactly 12 p.m., I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The clearing looked exactly as it had in the morning. The sunlight was bright and warm, and the forest seemed less threatening in the full light of day. The footprints were still there, still leading to the porch and nowhere else, but somehow they seemed less ominous now. I walked around the cabin slowly, checking the perimeter, looking for any other signs of disturbance. But there was nothing else. Just those impossible footprints that I needed to clear my head, to convince myself that there was a rational explanation for everything that had happened. I decided to explore the area around the cabin, to get my bearings and maybe find some answers. I stayed close to the clearing at first, walking along the edge where the forest began. The undergrowth was thick with ferns and fallen branches, making it difficult to see very far into the trees. After about 20 minutes of walking, I found something. A trail, barely visible beneath the overgrowth, cutting through the trees. It looked old and disused, probably not traveled in years, but it was definitely man-made. Someone had cleared this path long ago, and nature had been slowly reclaiming it ever since. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should follow it. But curiosity won out over caution. I wanted to know what was out here, wanted to understand this place better. I stepped onto the trail and began walking, pushing aside branches and stepping over fallen logs. The forest closed in around me, and the temperature dropped noticeably in the shade of the trees. I followed the trail for maybe 100 yards, maybe more, the path twisting and turning through the trees. And then, suddenly, I emerged into another clearing. This one was smaller than the one where the cabin sat, roughly circular and surrounded by tall pines. And in the center of the clearing was a structure that was a stone well, about waist-high, circular, and ancient-looking. The stones were covered in moss and lichen, and thick vines had grown up around the base. There was no bucket, no rope, no way to draw water. Just the stone structure and the dark opening at the top. I approached it slowly, feeling a sense of unease growing with each step. When I reached the well, I leaned over and looked down into the darkness. I could see nothing. The interior was pitch black, so dark that it seemed to swallow all light. I could not see the bottom, could not even guess how deep it went. I picked up a small rock from the ground and held it over the opening, and then I dropped it. I listened carefully. counting the seconds in my head, waiting for the sound of the rock hitting water or stone at the bottom. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15. The rock never made a sound. It was as if it had simply disappeared into that darkness, falling forever into an abyss with no end. I backed away from the well quickly, a cold fear settling over me. There was something fundamentally wrong about that well, something that defied logic and physics. No well should be that deep. No well should be that silent. I turned and hurried back along the trail, not stopping until I emerged back at the cabin clearing. I went inside and locked the door behind me, my heart pounding that I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to rationalize what I had seen. The well was probably just very deep, I told myself. The rock had probably hit water, and the sound just had not carried back up to the surface. There were perfectly reasonable explanations for everything. The footprints could have been made by a hiker who had gotten lost, who had wandered up to the cabin and then retraced their steps. Their returning prints overlapping the original ones so closely that they appeared to be only one set, but I did not believe any of it. Deep down, I knew something was wrong with this place. Something was very wrong. That evening, I was more careful about following the rules. I kept all the windows closed, even though the cabin grew warm from the fire I built. I made sure I was inside with the door locked well before 10 p.m. And I thought about rule number 3. Keep all lights off in the basement. Do not go down there for any reason after dark. I had not given much thought to the basement since that first day. But now, as darkness fell and shadows gathered in the corners of the cabin, I found myself thinking about it. What was down there? Why was it so important to keep the lights off? I walked to the hallway and stood in front of the basement door, staring at it. My hand reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then pulled back. No, I would not go down there. I would follow the rules, all of them, no matter how strange they seemed. I returned to the living room and tried to relax by the fire. I read for a while, made myself dinner, washed the dishes. The evening passed slowly, each minute stretching out. I kept checking my watch, watching as it crept closer to 10 p.m. As the hour approached, I felt my anxiety building. Would there be knocking again tonight? Would the rocking chair move? At exactly 10:15 p.m., I heard it point 3 sharp knocks on the front door. The sound was so sudden and loud that I actually jumped, my book falling from my hands onto the floor. I stared at the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The knocking came again. 3 deliberate, forceful knocks that echoed through the cabin. Rule number 2. If you hear knocking at the door after 10 p.m., do not look through the peephole or answer. I wanted to look. I wanted to see who or what was out there. But I forced myself to stay seated on the couch, my hands gripping the cushions so tightly my knuckles turned white. The knocking continued, louder now, more insistent. Whoever or whatever was out there wanted in. The sound seemed to reverberate through the cabin, through my bones, demanding a response. That I sat frozen, barely breathing, as the knocking went on and on. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15. Each knock was the same. 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, then 3 more. The rhythm never varied, never changed. It was mechanical, relentless, inhuman. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. I sat on the couch, listening, waiting for the knocking to resume or for something else to happen. But nothing did. The cabin was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the pounding of my own heart. That I did not move for a long time. I just sat there, staring at the door, expecting it to burst open at any moment. But it remained closed and locked. Eventually, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, I forced myself to stand up. My legs were shaky, and my whole body felt tense and exhausted from the adrenaline. That I knew I would not be able to sleep, not after that. So I added more wood to the fire and settled back onto the couch with my book, though I did not actually read. I just stared at the pages while my mind raced with questions. Who had been knocking? Why had they stopped? And most importantly, what would have happened if I had opened the door? The night dragged on with agonizing slowness. I kept the fire going, not wanting the cabin to fall into complete darkness. Every sound made me tense up, expecting the knocking to start again. But it did not. The rest of the night passed in silence. Broken only by the crackling of burning wood and the occasional pop of a spark, I must have dozed off at some point because I woke with a start to find pale morning light filtering through the windows. I was still on the couch, my neck stiff and my back aching. The fire had burned down to ash. I checked my watch. It was 6:42 a.m. I had made it through another night. I stood up slowly, stretching out my cramped muscles, and walked to the kitchen to make coffee. As I filled the pot with water from the tap, I noticed something on the counter. A glass of water. And then I remembered. I was supposed to leave a glass of water on the counter before bed each night. But I had forgotten last night, too shaken by the knocking to remember the rules. Wait. If I had forgotten to leave the water out, then why was there a glass sitting on the counter now? I approached it slowly, staring at the glass. It was full, filled almost to the brim with clear water. I definitely had not left it there. I would have remembered, which meant someone else had. But who? And more importantly, when? My hands were shaking as I picked up the glass and examined it. The water looked normal, perfectly clear. But something about it made my skin crawl. I carried it to the sink and poured it out, watching the water swirl down the drain. And then I filled a cup with water from the tap to make my coffee. As I brought the cup to my nose, I caught it. A faint smell, barely noticeable, but definitely there. The water smelled wrong, like rust and something else, something organic and decaying. I immediately poured it out and grabbed one of the bottles of water I had brought from Bellingham. I would not be drinking from the tap. Not today, maybe not ever. The third day passed in a haze of anxiety and exhaustion. I was running on very little sleep, and my nerves were frayed. I tried to keep myself occupied, reading, writing in my journal, going for short walks around the clearing in the daylight. But I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. Multiple times I spun around, certain that I had seen movement at the edge of the forest or a shadow passing by a window. But there was never anything there when I looked. That evening, I made sure to follow all the rules carefully. I left a glass of water on the counter before sunset. I kept all the windows closed. I was inside with the door locked well before dark. And I made absolutely certain not to go near the basement door. That I was sitting by the fire around 9:30 p.m., trying to read, when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was coming from the living room, but it took me a moment to identify the source. The radio.it had turned itself on. Static filled the cabin, loud and harsh, the white noise seeming to press against my ears. I stared at the radio in the corner, watching as the dial glowed with a faint orange light. Rule number 6 came rushing back. If the radio turns on by itself, let it play until it stops on its own. Do not change the station or turn it off. I sat frozen on the couch, listening to the static. It was not constant, not uniform. There were patterns in it, rises and falls in volume. Almost like the radio was trying to tune itself to a station but could not quite lock onto the signal. The static would grow louder, almost painfully so, and then fade to a softer hiss, only to build again. After a few minutes, the static began to change. Words emerged from the noise, fragmented and distorted, barely comprehensible. I leaned forward, straining to make them out. It sounded like someone speaking, but the voice was wrong, warped and stretched, as if it were coming from very far away or being played at the wrong speed. Alone, not, warned, should have, left. The words sent chills down my spine. I could not tell if it was a man's voice or a woman's, or if it was even human at all. The static swelled again, drowning out the words, and then faded once more. Too late, staying. They know, watching. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I wanted to turn off the radio, to stop that terrible voice from speaking. But the rule was clear. Let it play until it stops on its own. My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. The voice continued, in and out of the static, speaking in fragments that I could barely understand. But the message was clear enough. I should not be here. I should leave. Something was watching me. And it was too late. The broadcast went on for almost an hour, the voice rising and falling. Sometimes speaking in what might have been full sentences, but so distorted I could not make them out. Other times, just single words repeated over and over. Run. Leave. Go. Now. And then, finally, the radio clicked off. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the static had been. I sat on the couch, my entire body trembling, staring at the radio as if it might turn back on at any moment. But it did not. It just sat there in the corner, dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. That I did not sleep at all that night. I could not. I sat by the fire, keeping it burning through the darkness, my eyes fixed on the door and windows, waiting for the knocking or the rocking chair or something worse. But the night passed without incident. Just silence and my own racing thoughts. When dawn finally broke on the fourth day, I knew I could not stay much longer. My mental state was deteriorating. I was exhausted, paranoid, jumping at every sound. I needed to leave, to get back to civilization, to be around people and light and normalcy. But I had paid for a week, and some stubborn part of me refused to give up and run away. I told myself I could make it through a few more days. I told myself I was being irrational, that everything could be explained, but deep down, I knew the truth. This place was wrong. Something was here, something that did not want me here, or perhaps something that wanted me here too much. That morning, I went to the kitchen to make breakfast and stopped dead in my tracks. The glass of water I had left on the counter the night before was empty, completely empty. I had filled it to the brim before going to bed. I was certain of it. But now it was bone dry, not even a drop remaining at the bottom. Rule number 7 came back to me, though I realized it was not actually number 7 anymore. That rule was about the rocking chair. But I remembered now, there had been something else in my initial reading. The glass of water. If it was empty in the morning, do not drink any water from the tap that day. I stared at the empty glass for a long moment, then picked it up and put it in the sink. I would be using only bottled water today, and tomorrow, and for however many days I had left here. I decided to try to explore more of the area, to map out the surroundings in case I needed to leave quickly. I packed a small backpack with water and some snacks and set out, staying in the clearing at first, but gradually venturing farther. I found more trails, all of them old and overgrown, leading off in different directions. I followed one that seemed to head toward higher ground, hoping to get a better view of the area. After about 45 minutes of hiking, I reached a small ridge that overlooked the valley. From here, I could see for miles, the forest stretching out in all directions, an endless sea of green broken only by the distant peaks of other mountains. It was beautiful in a way, but also profoundly isolating. There was no sign of civilization anywhere. No roads, no power lines, no buildings. Just wilderness as far as the eye could see. I turned to head back down and noticed something carved into a tree near the edge of the ridge. I walked over to examine it. The carving was old, the bark having grown around it, but I could still make out the words, "They watch. Follow the rules." Below that, carved more recently it seemed, were tally marks. I counted them. 14 marks. 14 sets of 4 vertical lines with a diagonal line through them, plus 4 more marks. 74 total. 74 what? Days? Weeks? People? I backed away from the tree, my unease deepening. Someone else had been here, had stayed at that cabin, and had counted something. Had they made it out? Had they survived by following the rules? Or had something else happened to them? I hurried back down the trail toward the cabin, no longer interested in exploring. I just wanted to be inside, behind locked doors, even if the cabin itself did not feel entirely safe anymore. That afternoon, I made a decision. I would leave tomorrow. I did not care about losing the money I had paid for the week. I did not care about looking foolish or giving up. I just needed to get out of here, to get back to Bellingham, to be somewhere that made sense. I would pack tonight, and at first light tomorrow, I would drive away from this place and never look back. The fourth night was the worst yet. I went to bed early, exhausted beyond measure, hoping to get at least a few hours of sleep before my departure in the morning. I had packed most of my things, leaving out only what I would need for the night and morning. My car keys were on the coffee table, ready to grab. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. And then, around midnight according to my watch, I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth across the wooden boards. Each step made the boards creak and groan, the sound echoing through the cabin. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The footsteps continued, walking from one end of the porch to the other, then back again. Back and forth, in a steady rhythm. I wanted to look out the window, to see what was making those sounds. But I was too terrified to move. The pacing went on for what felt like hours. And then it stopped, right in front of the door. I heard nothing for a long moment, just silence. And then came the knocking. But this time it was different. This time it was not 3 sharp raps. It was a steady, continuous pounding, fists hammering against the wooden door over and over and over. The door shook in its frame from the force of the blows. I expected it to splinter, to break apart, to give way at any moment. But somehow it held. The pounding went on, and then I heard something else. A voice, muffled by the door but unmistakably speaking. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The words were repeated over and over, matching the rhythm of the pounding. The voice was flat and emotionless, neither male nor female, just a monotone chant that sent ice through my veins. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." I pulled the covers over my head like a child, as if that thin layer of fabric could protect me from whatever was outside. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to block out the sound, but it was impossible. The pounding and the voice filled the cabin, filled my head, drowning out everything else. And then, just when I thought I could not take it anymore, it stopped. The pounding ceased. The voice fell silent. The footsteps retreated across the porch and then faded away entirely. That I lay in bed, shaking, tears streaming down my face, waiting for it to start again. But it did not. The rest of the night passed in terrible silence. When morning finally came, I was out of bed immediately. I did not bother with breakfast. I just grabbed my already packed bags, snatched my keys from the coffee table, and headed for the door. As I reached for the doorknob, I noticed something that made me freeze. There were scratches on the inside of the door, deep gouges in the wood, running vertically down the surface, as if something with claws had tried to tear its way through from the outside. But that did not make sense. If something had been scratching at the door, the marks should be on the outside, not the inside. Unless something had been trying to get out, not in. I shook my head, refusing to think about it. I just needed to leave. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, stepping out onto the porch. The morning was overcast, the sky gray and threatening rain. I looked at the rocking chair as I passed it. Someone had left something on the seat. It was a piece of paper, folded and placed deliberately in the center of the chair. I hesitated, then picked it up and unfolded it. The same neat red handwriting I had seen on the rules list. "Thank you for following the rules. Not everyone does. You are welcome back anytime. The cabin will always be here, waiting." I crumpled the paper in my fist and threw it as hard as I could toward the forest. I did not care what it meant. I did not care about any of it. I just wanted to leave. I loaded my bags into the car, got in, and started the engine. As I began to drive away down the dirt road, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The cabin sat in the clearing, dark and still. And on the porch, I could see the rocking chair moving, back and forth, even though there was no wind. Even though there was no one there. I pressed down on the gas pedal and did not look back again. The drive back to Bellingham was a blur. I drove faster than I should have, desperate to put distance between myself and that place. When I finally reached the city limits, I felt like I could breathe again. I went straight to my apartment, locked myself inside, and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined everything, that stress and isolation had played tricks on my mind. But I knew it was not true. What I had experienced was real. All of it. A week after returning home, I tried to look up the cabin online. The listing was gone, completely removed from the rental website. I searched for Pinecrest Cabin, for J. Pierce, for any record of the property. Nothing. It was as if it had never existed. I tried to contact the owner, but the email address bounced back as invalid. The phone number I had been given went to a message saying it was no longer in service. There was no trace of my reservation, no record of my payment. The money had simply vanished from my account with no transaction history. I thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I had rented a haunted cabin that now did not exist? That I had heard voices and knocking and had seen impossible footprints? They would think I was insane. I tried to move on with my life. I went back to work, fell back into my routine, tried to forget, but I could not. The memories haunted me. The sound of that flat, emotionless voice saying, "Let me in." The sight of the rocking chair moving on its own. The footprints that led nowhere. The well that had no bottom. And then, about 3 weeks after I returned, something happened that made me realize it was not over. That I came home from work one evening to find my apartment door unlocked. I always locked it without fail. Always. But when I turned the knob, it opened easily. I stepped inside cautiously, looking around for any sign of a break-in. Nothing seemed to be missing or disturbed. But on my kitchen counter, there was something that had not been there when I left that morning. A glass of water filled to the brim. And next to it, a piece of paper with that familiar red handwriting. "You did not finish your stay. The cabin misses you." My hands shook as I picked up the paper. This was impossible. I was in Bellingham, hundreds of miles from those mountains. How could this be happening? I looked at the glass of water, and as I watched, I saw tiny ripples forming on the surface, as if something was moving beneath it or as if footsteps were approaching, causing the water to vibrate. That I grabbed the glass and poured it down the sink, then tore up the note and threw it in the trash. This was not happening. It could not be happening. I was safe here in my apartment, in the city, surrounded by people and lights and normalcy. But that night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. The sound of a rocking chair creaking. Back and forth, coming from somewhere in my apartment. That I got up and searched every room, but I could not find the source of the sound. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I turned on every light in the apartment and sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, waiting for morning. The sound continued until dawn. Since then, it has happened every few nights. The glass of water appearing, the sound of the rocking chair. Sometimes I hear knocking at my door late at night, but when I look through the peephole, there is no one there. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of footprints on my balcony in the morning, even though I am on the 4th floor. That I have moved twice since then, trying to escape it. But it always finds me. The cabin, or whatever haunts it, will not let me go. I followed most of the rules, but apparently that was not enough. Maybe I broke one without realizing it. Maybe I was not supposed to leave at all. Maybe once you go to that place, once you step through that door and agree to its terms, you belong to it forever. I am telling you this story now because I need people to know. I need someone to understand what happened to me, to believe me. If you are watching this video, if you have made it this far, then you know the truth. These things exist. Places like that cabin exist. And the rules they give you are not suggestions. They are not jokes. They are the only things standing between you and whatever lurks in the darkness. That I have shared my story. I have told you everything that happened, everything I remember. If you found this helpful, if you think others should hear this warning, then share this video. Let people know. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any updates, because I have a feeling my story is not over yet. And most importantly, if you ever find yourself renting a cabin, or staying in a house, or visiting any place that gives you a list of rules, read them carefully. Follow them exactly. Do not deviate. Do not test them. Do not assume they are just for atmosphere. Your life might depend on it. That I never went back to Pinecrest Cabin. I could not if I wanted to, because it seems to exist in some place between the maps. Some location that only appears when it wants to be found. But sometimes, late at night, when I am lying in bed in whatever apartment I am living in at the time, I hear it. That soft, rhythmic creaking. The sound of a rocking chair moving back and forth, on a porch I am no longer on. In a cabin I can never return to. And I know, deep down in my bones, that whatever was out there in those woods, whatever walked on that porch and knocked on that door and whispered from that radio, it has not forgotten about me. It is still watching, still waiting, still rocking in that chair, back and forth, patient and eternal. Some places hold on to you. Some places do not let go. And some rules exist for reasons we should never try to understand. I learned that lesson in the Cascade Mountains, in a cabin that may or may not exist, in a clearing surrounded by trees that whispered secrets I was not meant to hear. That I followed the rules. Most of them, anyway. But it was not enough. It is never enough. Because once you enter a place like that, once you acknowledge its existence by staying there, by sleeping under its roof and breathing its air, you become part of it. And it becomes part of you. The cabin is still out there, somewhere in those mountains, waiting for the next person who needs to escape, who seeks isolation and silence, who thinks they can handle a week alone with only some strange rules for company. Maybe that person is you. Maybe you will be the one to find that listing on some forgotten rental website, to see those grainy photos and read that enticing description about complete solitude. If you do, if you find yourself driving up a dirt road that seems to go on forever, if you see that wooden sign marking the turnoff to Pinecrest Cabin, I want you to remember my story. I want you to remember what happened to me. And I want you to ask yourself one question. Is the silence really worth it? Because I thought it was. I thought a week away from everything was exactly what I needed. And maybe it was. Maybe I got exactly what I was looking for. But I also got so much more. Things I will never be able to forget. Sounds I will hear for the rest of my life. And the knowledge that there are places in this world where the normal rules do not apply, where something else is in charge, where something watches and waits and follows its own unknowable agenda. I am Max. I am 29 years old, and I rented a cabin in the Cascade Mountains. I was given a list of strange rules, and I thought they were a joke. But they were not a joke. They were a warning, a contract, a boundary between our world and something else. And by staying there, by agreeing to those terms even in ignorance, I opened a door that I can never fully close. The rocking chair is still moving. I can hear it now, even as I record this. Back and forth, waiting for me to return, waiting for me to understand that I never really left at all. Some places never let you go, and Pinecrest Cabin is one of them.